everyone, Amy Bowser-Tennant here, the genealogy reporter, and it is Family Story Friday. I want to share something a little more thought-provoking today, a little more sad, maybe a sad story. I want to talk about death within our family stories and maybe how our ancestors handled that kind of thing. I got to thinking about this because as I researched my Lee County, Virginia relatives, as well as my Harlan County, Kentucky relatives, I noticed that in the 1910 census, they ask a specific question to all the women. They ask, and I wrote it down here, how many children is the person the mother of? And of the children a person has mothered, how many are still alive? And as I was looking at my great-great-grandmother, Margaret Cole, hers said that she had been the mother to 12 children and only 6 were living. I thought, wow, half her children had passed, right? And so then I started looking at the other households. And within this holler, if you will, every single woman on the page had lost half the children she bore. Can you imagine? Now, I thought also about the social history tied in there. Okay, what might that say about this community? I might be mistaken, but my opinion is that if these are neighbors, and I already knew that they lived in the holler, I knew that their jobs were farmers, coal miners. I knew they had a lot of children. I knew that the poverty was a big deal down there. I would say that a lot of times these women were losing their children due to lack of health care, lack of nutrition. Also, really popular is not the right word, really common down there was to get married at 12, 13, 14. And people who are watching this might disagree with me, but in my family, we had women getting married as early as 13 and 14. That was common. And so, perhaps when they got pregnant that first, second, or third time, those pregnancies weren't viable because the woman was simply not big enough or strong enough, healthy enough, mature enough to carry a baby full term. I don't know. I'm making some speculations here, but death seemed to be a real part of these people's lives. Now, I've often shared a lot of stories about Big Grandma, my very colorful maternal grandmother, and she grew up in Jonesville, actually Blackwater, Virginia, which is in Lee County, and she experienced death in her family. It seemed like a lot, like, I don't know, more than usual. I guess I can't say that it was more than usual, but it seemed to be significant. And I've often wondered how that affected her growing up, because I know that death can be traumatic, especially to a young person. So a couple of stories. Her mother was married at age 13. And my grandma, Big Grandma, was the very first of the babies to survive. And there's a little story about Big Grandma only weighing 1.5 pounds. I think she probably weighed a little more than that. I have a real hard time believing she could have survived on her own in those conditions at 1.5 pounds, but that's what it is. And that her mother would safety pin her to a pillow so that she wouldn't roll away or get in any sort of danger, be in any sort of danger. I thought that was a cute little story. Now, when Grandma was 9 years old, her father, Floyd Witt, came home from work one afternoon with a terrible headache. He also had a fever, and by the next day, he was dead. And he died of spinal meningitis. Now, when she was 9, he went with their mother to live with her mother. Now, Grandma grew up, alongside her mother and grandmother and grandfather, and then she married and started having children of her own. She had a little girl in the 1940s named Wanda Faye. And Wanda, this is a real special story. We only have one picture of Wanda Fay, and she has a big mark on her head where her little brother, Ray, had hit her with something, I think a shovel, by accident. And now he was only 2, so, it wasn't like he was running around with a shovel, trying to hit his sister. But anyway, about the age of 4, Wanda Fay had been playing in the front yard with her other siblings, and they were playing Riddle Marie. And it's a little poem. It says, riddle me, riddle Marie, I see something you can't see. And they would play this game. And apparently Wanda had a handful of buttons and other little small trinkets, and she had put them in her mouth to hide them. And in doing so, and in playing this game, and I suppose maybe laughing, giggling and whatnot, she accidentally swallowed something. It was several weeks later that Wanda developed what they thought was some sort of seizures. She was seizing. My Aunt Sue is the one I interviewed about this. She was old enough to remember these happenings very clearly, and she said she would remember that Wanda would seize up and that they were scared to death, had no idea what was going on, but that her dad would go over and cradle Wanda and rock her back and forth and promise God he would never backslide if he would just take care of Wanda and let her be okay. Well, she started developing also a fever, and Grandma really wanted to take her to the doctor, but Grandpa kept saying, no, I think she'll be okay, Goldie. I think she'll be all right. It's probably just a cold, something like this. I don't think they realized that the seizures were in conjunction with this fever, and I kind of got the impression when I was talking to Aunt Sue that maybe this had gone on for quite some time, and so sometimes she would act like she wasn't sick, and then sometimes she was, and back and forth as to what was going on. But by the time they realized they had a serious problem, that Wanda was very ill, she was in her little bed, and she started to hallucinate, and she was very feverish, and she would talk to people, and reach for them and think that the other people were there and so forth. So Grandpa went and found a vehicle. They didn't have one of their own, and he and Grandma took her to the hospital in Jonesville. And she died just shortly after getting there. And for a long time in the family, they didn't really know what she died of. Some of them said it was strep throat that had turned to rheumatic fever. Some family members felt it was, like Aunt Sue said, this little brass ball they suspect she swallowed that may have lodged somewhere and caused an infection, something of that variety. So I was able to find her death certificate, and sure enough, they said it was from a gangrene infection. And so I speculate that that's probably what happened. She had swallowed this little brass ball. It had a jagged edge. It got lodged somewhere, caused an infection, which then caused probably sepsis, I'm guessing here, and she passed away. They dressed her in her nice little clothes and pretty little shoes and ribbons in her hair to bury her, and she is now residing in Wolf Branch Holler, Lee County, Virginia, up on the mountain next to Grandpa. So, Grandma then, not too long after that, lost her husband to a horrible coal mining accident. She nearly lost both of her boys in the same accident, but thankfully they were only very minorly injured. And so, I wonder if sometimes we're really hard on our ancestors about how they acted or what they did or how they weren't very loving or maybe they weren't real affectionate, things of this nature, just all sorts of things really. And I wonder, was it because of these types of trauma and death and difficulty that they went through? And, I don't think we can kind of understand that, where death is your family friend almost, it's a constant worry, a cold, a flu, a broken leg could result in your death. It's kind of thought-provoking to think about, to put ourselves in the place of our ancestors and maybe what they were dealing with and what the community was like and what their neighbors were dealing with. I suppose they were probably really close to their neighbors. I can imagine that they would be. They would have to be to get through these times. How about you? Have you experienced finding lots of information about death in your family? Were there lots of death? Were your family members in a poverty situation where that may have been affected? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for joining me here on Family Story Friday, even though this one was a little bit of a sad tale. I hope you'll come back for Genealogy Tip Tuesday and Genealogy Thoughts Thursday. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe because we need you for our channel. Thanks and have a great day. Bye-bye.